All right, so let me conceptually show you how to um, retire abundantly and to maximize the efficiency of your personal finance. So let's use a wealth engine as an example or an analogy of what we're trying to do. We're trying to make your wealth engine as efficient as possible. So first thing we know is that when you're working, you're feeding this wealth engine. And at some point, you stop working and you're going to stop feeding the wealth engine. And at some point, you're going to expect that your wealth engine will start to feed you to cover your lifestyle, the things that you need to retire abundantly. Okay? So here's the thing. What we know is that every engine, in fact, if you rub your hands together like this, you're going to feel heat, right? And if you're cold, heat's a good thing. But in an engine, that causes friction, and that's not a good thing. So we want to make sure that your wealth engine isn't leaking out dollars through friction. And we use an acronym called TRICK, T-R-I-C-K. So the first friction that's being leaked out is taxes. And we know that from our experience and research that most people pay more taxes than they should, simply because they don't have a long-term strategy in place to reduce their tax liability. We also know that folks take unrewarded risk. It's okay to take risk. I mean, life's risky. However, why would you take unrewarded risk? And yet we find people out there today that are taking risk and not getting any return for that risk. We also know that investment mix can be a problem. It's almost like if you were driving a car and you were stepping on the brake and the gas at the exact same time. You're not really getting anywhere. And now when we look at people's investment mix, that seems to be what's going on. We also look at costs. What we know is that people today are transferring money unknowingly and unnecessarily to others in the area of costs, unnecessary costs. And then the last thing is knowledge gaps. You know, there are today a lot of things that people know that they think are true. And then they find out that these things aren't true. Things they thought were true all along turn out not to be true. When would they want to know about this? Well, the answer is usually yesterday, right? So there's lots of knowledge gaps, and we know that there is financial pornography being promoted by the media today to sell newspapers and airtime. And most of the information is incorrect. So there's this knowledge gap that causes friction and causes your engine not to be as efficient. So what we want to try to do is cut off that friction, and then we can build a wall around that wealth engine, insulate it from friction, so that we can then have surplus. You see, and quite honestly, most people don't even know if they have surplus. So if your engine is operating efficiently, like a Formula One race car, as opposed to my first car, which was a 1950 DeSoto, not very efficient, it would be it would grow and it'd be surplus. And when you ask folks what do they want to happen to that surplus, they usually want it to go to family. So here's the thing. We know that there are certain predators that can attack those assets, certainly estate taxes. And a lot of people say to me, well, yeah, but, you know, Sal, I think the estate tax is going away. You know, there's a movement afoot in Washington to reduce the tax or eliminate the estate tax. And quite honestly, I don't know what's going to happen there. All I can tell you is what the history of the estate tax has been. And it really goes back to the first century of our country. In the first century, the estate tax was implemented and repealed 3 times. And it was sitting on a single pillar, and that was revenue generation. It was really designed and implemented every time that we were fighting a war. And then when we'd get in peacetime, they'd repeal it. And then when we'd be fighting another war, they'd implement it again. Except when we got to the early 1900s. Teddy Roosevelt was the sitting president, and he added a second pillar of which the estate tax was to sit on, and that was redistribution of wealth. And there was this backlash of aristocracy from Europe, and all of a sudden they wanted to put a bigger burden, a financial burden on the wealthy. And so the question I have for you today is, do you think the political environment in Washington has changed permanently, that we are no longer in need of money? Well, the last I checked, we had $20 trillion of debt. Somewhere along the line, we got to pay that back. And then the second thing is, do you think this idea of redistribution of wealth is going to go away permanently? You know, the Congress changes every 2 years. The president changes every 4 to 8 years. So it's like a volleyball. The estate tax, the income tax, it bounces up and down depending on who's in office. We also have to worry about litigation. We live in one of the most litigious societies in the history of the world. As a matter of fact, there are 41,000 lawsuits filed every single day, 365 days a year. In fact, the only good news is that it's down from 50,000 lawsuits. In fact, 94% of all lawsuits filed worldwide are filed right here in the United States. Now, let me share with you two stories. You're not going to like either one of these stories. You know, Maria inherited some money from her family. They put it in the wrong kind of trust. After her parents died, she's driving through an intersection. Drunk driver plows into her, drives her car into a minivan full of nursery school kids, kills 4 of the kids and the driver. Huge lawsuit ensues. The jury finds Maria 10% liable because they wanted to make sure that her insurance company paid the families that lost their kids. And they found the drunk driver 90% liable. Well, what the judge never explained to the jury is that you could be 1% liable in the United States. We have what's called joint and several liability, which means that you could be 1% liable and wind up paying the entire bill. Maria lost her entire parents' inheritance. I'll tell you a second story. You're not going to like this one either. Ted Kennedy drives off the Chappaquiddick Bridge. Mary Jo Kopechne dies in the car. The Kopechne family sues the Kennedys. They have their money in the right kind of trust, and all the Kopechne family got for the loss of their daughter was the $300,000 of liability coverage that Teddy had on his Oldsmobile. The third thing we have to worry about is divorce. You know, if your children or grandchildren happen to get married, there's a 50% chance that marriage will end in divorce. So can you imagine you transfer assets to the next generation and you find out that one of your kids gets divorced and their estranged spouse walks off with your assets? I had a father say to me, that's worse than the IRS, and he may be right. And then the last thing we have to worry about is bad decisions. Not your kids, but other people's kids make bad decisions. They make bad financial decisions, bad business decisions, bad relationship decisions. So what do we have to do here? Well, we've got to put a wall around those assets to protect them against those predators and make sure it's doubly insulated. You see, because the IRS puts this tax wall up, and we want to get money to the next generation. IRS puts a tax wall up. They give us a doorway, and they give us a window. The window currently is $14,000 a year, and annually to as many people as you want. The doorway today is in excess of $5 million. So what do? We use that doorway and window and to try to avoid the toll. Now, if we exceed the toll, if we exceed the doorway or the window, we could pay a toll of anywhere from 40 to 70%. So we want to try to avoid that. We also want to make sure that we have control and access to any money that we transfer through this tax wall to the next generation. We also want to make sure that those red assets, they get highly taxable. And those red assets are pretty nasty. They are retirement plans, IRAs, 401k plans, SEP plans, 403b plans, defined benefit pension plans. Things of that nature, we call them red assets because they get taxed very heavily. Anywhere from 40 to 70% they can be taxed. And so we want to make sure that we avoid that. And we want to do is leave those assets to charity. Once we've got enough money on the other side of the tax wall to benefit our family, then we use charity to avoid the tax. And in fact, we use charity to give us upfront income tax deductions that we could use now against our taxes for doing something later on after we're gone. And that creates a zero tax plan. It's really that simple. Now, there's 104 strategies, possibilities, and combinations to accomplish this. What we have to find out is what's the 3 to 5 to 7 strategies that make the most sense for you and your family. Now, if you're going to watch the next video, we're actually going to walk you through a case study where you can see how a family was able to take advantage of some of these things in order to reduce their tax liability and get more for themselves and more for their family. So watch the next video, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it.